So good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome everyone back to our Tuesday Lunch and Learn. And I apologize the last 2 weeks that I've been away. I was leading a group of Emmett students to a trip to Poland, and a very, very life-changing type trip. So last week I was in Warsaw, unable to do it, unable to make the shir. I do apologize and glad to be back. And we hope that Tuesdays, 12 o'clock will continue. This will be a time to learn and to grow together and to just spend 30 minutes every Tuesday as a community of people who want to grow into types of self-growth through Torah, journey through Torah as we call it. So welcome back, and I hope everybody had a wonderful Shavuos and is rested up and excited for a new opportunity to come together and to grow together to learn together. So this week, I'd like to talk about something a little bit related to Shavuos and maybe the most important ingredient that we need for success in learning Torah, and maybe for success in all of our spiritual growth. You know, we speak a lot in terms about relationships and how are we relating to Hashem. You know, are we loving Hashem properly? Are we succeeding in really realizing the goodness and the greatness of Hashem, what He does for us? We speak a lot about akaras hatov to people. We speak about relationships, ben adam lechavero, which is, of course, so critical and so crucial in everything that we do. And being able to be makir tov, to recognize the good, that's an extraordinarily important relationship, as we know. However, I think there's one relationship that we overlook. And this might be the key to all of them, and maybe the most important relationship that if developed properly, will unlock a beautiful relationship with Hashem and a beautiful relationship with others. And what I mean by that is, I'm referring to our relationship with ourselves. We might call them in Hebrew, kavod atzmi, my own dignity, my own greatness, appreciating who I am and what I am, and what it means to be created in the image of Hashem. And therefore, to understand that the potential that we have is limitless. There's no end to what we have. That's, I think, the more we understand the great part of Kavod Atzmi, the greater we'll be able to relate to others, we'll be able to truly appreciate other people, recognize how great they are, and we'll appreciate that we're worthy of being in a relationship with Hashem. But Kavod Atzmi, that personal sense of my own individual greatness, is something I'd like to touch on today. And not because we're trying to do it in a way to be in any way egotistical or self-serving, but because we have to appreciate our greatness. That's the key to unlock all relationships in this world. So with that said, I'd like to take us through a fascinating statement from the book of Ruth, which we read yesterday on Shavuos. And from there, we're going to take it to a piece of note that I think offers us points. By the end, I hope we walk away with this idea that we have to appreciate what it means to look at oneself and say, I have respect for me, and I value me, and I'm aware of my inner greatness. So let's just take a look, begin by looking at a medrash, and this could be found in the Rabbi, Dalet A. And it says as follows, Tani Rabbi Yeshua, Yosef Imeshu Balabais, Ani Osef Balabais. The statement that says more than the Balabais does for the Ani, in other words, more than the host does for the poor person would say. Ani Osef Balabais, the poor person does for the host. Interesting statement. You would think that the host does more for the poor person, does more for the host. But when we think about it, perhaps, really the poor person might do for the host. Because the host might have offered a meal, some challah, some chicken, some gefilte fish. But the ani, the poor person who graced his table, to enable that individual to achieve the next world. So in some ways, the poor person has been the catalyst to do much more for the wealthy person. The wealthy person did for the poor person. And then the Medrash says, we can learn this from a statement that Ruth made in the story of Ruth. Ruth said to her mother-in-law Naomi, Shema Isha Sha'asisi Imo Hayom Boaz. The man who did for me today such chesed and kindness, his name was Boaz. Shema Isha Sha'asisi Imo Hayom Boaz. The name of the man, excuse me, I read it a little wrong just because you naturally wanted to say it that way, but let me read it correctly. Shema Isha Sha'asisi Imo. Name of the man for whom I did today kindness, his name was Boaz. The Medrash says, it doesn't say that he did with me. Rather, it says, that I did with him. Amarla, she said to her mother Naomi, how much kindness I did for him for one piece of bread that he gave me. Let's review that just for a moment, that statement. It's somewhat strange, a strange verse in the book, and it needs explanation. You know, if we look at the story, remember the story of Ruth? The story of Ruth was a story where we know that Ruth was a Moabiyah. She was a princess in Moab, and her husband dies, and she follows her mother-in-law, leaving the throne, leaving the palace to begin a process of a real conversion, and to come into the land of Israel with Naomi. They come into the land of Israel and they're poor. They have absolutely nothing to eat. And Ruth is really has to go and to pick up what's called shchicha b'peah, and walk behind the farmers and just picking up what they drop behind them. That's something reserved for the poor, special mitzvahs the Torah has. But here she was a princess who's now relegated to such a position of poverty. And we know that Naomi has a relative named Boaz, and Boaz is an extremely wealthy man, and also the leader of the generation, and eventually is going to marry Ruth at this point. That's later in the story, not at this point in the story. But as she is walking behind the farmers in the fields of Boaz, picking up the shlichah and the payah, things that are dropped, the droppings, the leket, things that they are not allowed to take with them to the poor. She's gathering enough, and she's bringing it, and she's enough to go home and to make some bread with it. And when Naomi says to her, asks her the question, who was the man? What was the name of that man that you were able to gather the grain in this field? So the reaction of Ruth is, Shema Isha Asisi Imo Hayom Boaz. The man with whom I did kindness today, his name was Boaz. The Medrash is bothered by that. It should have said, Asher Osaimi. The man who he did, the man who did for me kindness. No, Ruth doesn't say that. She says, the man for whom I did the kindness. And what does that mean? It means, even look what I did for him. I enabled his kindness. I enabled his giving. I enabled him to have a chelek, a share in the next world. For what? A little piece of bread that he gave me. That's the reaction. Now, a very interesting reaction, because we know that if there's one personality trait that we're trying to develop, probably the most important personality trait that we're trying to work on is the trait we call a karta tov, gratitude. Gratitude is everything in relationships. It's the key to a relationship with human beings, to recognize that which we do. And it's the key to the relationship with the Almighty. It's everything. Everything works around being makir tov, gratitude. It sounds very much by the statement of Ruth that she's lacking gratitude. Like, what is she saying? The man for whom I did kindness today, what he gave me a piece of bread. But look what I did for him. I facilitated his next world. But that's not the way we're supposed to look at things in this world. We're supposed to look at things in a way to say, I have to appreciate what you did. And that's the greatest, really spiritual task of a human being, is to wake up and sort of get out of our habitual feeling that things are coming to us and be makir the tov. In Hebrew, the word for gratitude is akarat tov, to recognize the good. You know, our rabbis are so attuned to this. Our rabbis are so understanding how difficult it is that every morning when we get up, we have to make blessings of gratitude. We know we have 15 blessings of gratitude that begin as we rise in the morning. We bless Hashem as we hear the rooster crow, or the intellect, the mind works. We then thank Hashem for giving us the opportunity to not be slaves. We thank Hashem for the opportunity to have eyes that see, spinal cords, really to walk. We then praise Hashem for digestive tracts. So we're constantly focusing on the good that Hashem does for us, because recognizing the good is difficult in this world. And that is the key ingredient to any relationship, to recognize the good. And the problem is, the more someone does for you, or the more Hashem does for us, the more difficult it is to break ourselves out of that kind of spiritual sort of slumber and say, I really appreciate what you did. And I think we know in life that the people who are most difficult to thank really are those who do the most for us. I think that's a fact of life. A stranger who makes us breakfast, we spend the whole day calling them, thanking them, sending text messages. But perhaps one's wife who makes one's breakfast, maybe still a thank you as one walks out, but where's the gratitude? The answer is because so much good is done that we forget to turn it around and say, oh, I really appreciate you. So the ability to be makir, to recognize the good, is fundamentally the key ingredient in the building of relationship with Hashem and with each other. So Ruth's statement is somewhat shocking. Like, how could she say, when Naomi says, whose field were you in? She says, I was in the field. He says, the man with whom I did kindness, his name was Boaz. Not the man who did kindness for me, but the man for whom I did kindness with him. I enabled him to give to me, so to speak. Now, just with that thought in mind, there's a famous statement in the in Medrash. It says like this. It says, what is a good guest? Actually, good morning, brachos. What's a good guest? Who's a good guest? Do you have a guest over our homes for a Shabbos, for a meal? Who's a good guest? Orech tov mahu omer. A good guest, what does he say? Come and tirchos tarach balabais bishvili. He says, wow, look what this host did for me. Come a basar hevi lefanai. Oh, look at this wonderful, wonderful family. They prepared this delicious chicken, this delicious meat, this delicious steak. Oh, he bought it and he prepared it and made it so tasty. He did it all for me. Come a yain hevi lefanai. Oh, wow, which delicious. He made wine. He brought it there just for me. Come a glusko hevi lefanai. All those delicious desserts, that 7-layer cake and the chocolate mousse. Oh, she stayed up all Thursday night making it. Why? Because she knew I were to be her guest, and therefore she did it all for me. All that work that this hostess did, or this host did, it was all for me. That's a good guest. Orech tov. Orech tov is looking to say, you did it all for me. You did it for me. Now, granted, I know that you benefit from this. I know that by your giving to me, you're going to get a nice chunk of the next world. I understand that. But the proper attitude one has to have to chesed when it's done for us is to say, I have to feel that you did it all for me. Now, even though that's not always true, you think about it, because the Gemara says, well, what's the flip side? What's an oreach ra? What's a guest who is a bad guest? Oreach ra ma'u omer. What does a bad guest say? Matarech torach balabaisa. A bad guest says, this host, they didn't really do anything. What happened? They invited me over to their house to eat. She had already made challahs for her family. So I sat at the table. I ate a piece of challah. What, they're going to probably not finish the challah anyway. Pas achas achalti. Chaticha achas achalti. Oh, she was making a big chicken, a big steak, a big roast for the family. A lot of kids, a lot of children, her husband. So I sat at the table. I had a little piece. What's the big deal? Kozech chasisi. So they brought out nice wine. They brought the wine for themselves. Not going to finish the whole bottle anyway. So they gave me a cup of it. He said, Kol Torech Shotach Bal Bayis Zeh Lo Tarach El Bishul Yishlo Banav. All of the work and exertion that this host did, or this hostess did, they did it for each other. They did it for themselves and for the children. And I just happened to be there and benefit a little bit. Thomas says, not so fast. That's a bad guest. That's a guest who lacks in gratitude. A guest who has gratitude has to say, it was all done for me. It was just, you did it all for me. Now, I know in my mind, you really didn't do that. I know in my mind that really you made that delicious challah and desserts and roast and chicken soup and matzo balls. And I know you made it for the family. And I happened to be there at the table, enjoying it, a nice cup of nice bowl of soup, a nice matzo ball, participating. But the attitude one has to have in one's mind is the attitude of, you did it all for me. I have such gratitude to you. When I taste that delicious soup, oh, it was all for me. That's a good guest. Because one's utilizing that situation to be makir tov, to recognize the good, to appreciate what is being done for you. So if that's what the Talmud tells us is a good guest, and the flip side is a bad guest, let's go back to Rus for a second. What does Rus say? Rus, remember, she comes into the land of Israel. She doesn't have anything. She's relegated to gathering up the grain that's fallen behind the farmer. That wonderful mitzvah the Torah says of why you have to provide for the farmer. You have an opportunity for the poor. Where the farmer provides for the poor, they have a right to pick it up. It's not, you shouldn't go back for it. Don't turn back, but for the poor. But imagine the humiliation of that to some extent, especially a woman like Rus coming from royalty. And now, with such tremendous dedication, devotion, leaves her country, follows her mother and Naomi, very much like Avram, and let Lecha goes and willing to risk poverty and all because she wants to live a Jewish life. And Boaz has compassion on her, allows her to go into his field, and even helps protect her a little bit there. And when she comes back to Naomi that night, she says to Naomi says, so who was the man who did kindness for you? And again, what's her response? Shema Eish Asher Asisi Imo Hayom Boaz. The man for whom I did kindness. I did for him. Not he did for me, I did for him. His name was Boaz. What I did, that's the name of the man for whom I did the kindness. Isn't that the definition of a Reach Ra? Isn't that the definition of a bad guest? The bad guest is the one who doesn't say you did it for me, but says sort of discards and disregards and downplays all that's done for you. Boaz did a lot for her. She would not have dinner that night. But Boaz did not let her gather the grain in that field like that. So that piece, it might be a piece of bread, but that's dinner. And she has to appreciate that. To turn around and say, no, I did more for him. I did more for him than he did for me. That seems to be in the category of what a bad guest would say. The bad guest doesn't want to acknowledge, the bad guest wants to minimize the kindness and stuff. And yet Rus seems to be doing exactly that which the bad guest is guilty of. So the question is, how do we understand this and how do we put it into some sort of perspective? When we talk about Rus, Rus is going to be the great grandmother of David HaMelech. Kingship is going to arise from her. And the story of Rus is really an extraordinary story of a woman who is the Balas Chesed par excellence, a woman who is completely dedicated to other-centeredness, completely dedicated to Naomi, even completely dedicated to her dead husband, Machal. And we see that she's going to marry Boaz and try to bring him back to a Hebrew type relationship. She's the epitome of what it means to really live the ideal Jewish life of other-centeredness. Which maybe that's the whole purpose of the Torah, to create our personalities to be like that. And that may be one of the reasons, or perhaps one of the very important reasons, why it's such an important place where we read it. We read it on the afternoon of the second day of Shavuos. The holiday of the receiving of Torah. This is what Torah is about. It's about Rus. It's about dedication. It's about giving. It's about sacrifice. It's about developing a personality which can be so giving and other-centered and sacrificing for another. What a beautiful personality trait. That's the Torah wants from us. That's the Torah trying to develop inside of us. And yet, when we look at Rus, the statement which Rus makes seems to be so antithetical, so opposite what a person who is dedicated to kindness would say. He didn't do so much for me. I did more for him. So how do we understand that statement? How do we remove Rus from the category of a bad guest? And how do we place Rus where she rightfully belongs in this exalted world of chesed and giving and other-centeredness, for which she is so praised and merits to be the great-grandmother of King David, ultimately of Mashiach. And her story is the story where we read on the day that we receive the Torah. How do we put this statement into the whole that makes it all fit and work out together to really say, yeah, it's in keeping, it's in harmony with the personality of who Ruth really was. So hope the question's clear. Hope the question's clear. If the question's not clear, please text me after. Text me now. Maybe at the end we go over the phones and you could ask me to clarify more. I hope it's clear right now. Let's see if we can give a little bit of an answer. So I'd like to suggest something that my Rosh Yeshiva said. Hannah Leibovitz. Hannah Leibovitz was the Rosh Yeshiva of Kraft in New York, the Biblical of America, and then my Rabbi. And he said something which I feel is so remarkable and almost novel, maybe almost revolutionary in the way we think. And this is what I'd like to share with you right now. So perhaps what we need to say, instead of being so bothered by the fact that Ruth seems to not be expressing gratitude, seems to be that bad guest, we maybe have to get into her mindset a little bit. Why would she do that? What would motivate her to say something like that? What would motivate her to instead of focusing how much good is done for her, she focuses and flips around and says, how much good have I done for him? What would motivate that? Perhaps what we need to say, what would motivate that statement, is that imagine how dejected she was. Again, she was a princess. She is now in a state where she has to gather the gleaning, so to speak, and pick up what's left behind. She's in a very, very dejected state. What does that do to oneself? How does one feel? You know, I think we've all been in situations in life where we've had to be takers. And we don't always like it. It's not always so easy to be a taker. It doesn't feel so good. You know, I know personally that, you know, we were used to having guests at our home for many, many years, and people coming to our table, and we enjoy giving. And part of the beauty of Shem's table is to be able to give and to share. And I know certain times when I've had to be traveling and doing certain things where I've had to be a guest at someone else's table. There's a little bit of being uncomfortable with that. Rather be in a situation where giving them, taking them, people are very gracious, of course, and so much wanted to share and do anything they can to make you a part of it. And I respect that, and I always feel good. But there's something always inside of me in that situation. It always says, I don't enjoy being the taker as much as I like being the giver. And I think that's a natural feeling that we have. Now imagine if one had to be a taker to the point where one is dependent on the other for one's livelihood, one's piece of bread, one has nothing to eat, if not for the gatherings and the gleanings that one is picking up on in the field. What does that do to one's self-esteem? What does that do to one's sense of self? Imagine, it can be very damaging. It can really take a person and say, who am I? I feel so insignificant. I feel so unimportant. I feel like I'm not a real person. I'm not a giver. To give is everything, but to take is so hard to take. What does that do to the sense of one's called in Hebrew? Kavod atzmi. What does that do to one's sense of one's own greatness, one's own sense of one's honor, one's dignity, one's exalted sense that I'm created in the image of Hashem and my potential is without limitation? What does it do to that? It damages it, it hurts it, it destroys it. Ruth was a
a very wise woman. She was the Balas Chesed par excellence. Her whole essence was kindness. But now the kindness had to turn. The kindness had to turn and said, how can I be kind to myself? Right now, more than I need to focus on what Boaz did for me, I need to flip it around and I have to say, what did I do for him? Because I also did for him. He gave me a piece of bread, that's true. But I was there, I provided him I was the means, the vehicle for which ultimately his reward in Shemayim, heaven's going to be great. I did for him also. It wasn't just a one-way street, it's a two-way street over here. Now, by no means, would Ruth deny the good. That's not who she is. Her whole personality is other-centeredness. But at this juncture, the most important place where she has to focus her chesed, her kindness, is on her own dignity, on her own self, on her own self-respect. She has to focus right now and say that I too am a giver here. I did for him. He didn't only do for me. I too did for him. Her kavod atzmi, her self-respect, her sense of my gadlut, my greatness, is paramount now. I can't lose that. I'm feeling I might lose it. I'm feeling that might slip away from me a little bit because I am in a situation where I need to take. But I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to flip that around and I'm going to tell Naomi, my mother-in-law, I did much for him. Look what I did for him. Asher asiti imo, what I did for him, not what he did for me. I know he did for me. I know that. I'm very cognizant of that. But I need to verbalize, I need to express, I need to internalize that I too am a giver here. I too am somebody important in this relationship. I have to focus on my greatness right now as well. My kavod atzmi. I can't lose sight of who I am. And that seems what Ruth is doing. She's not a bad guest. She's the ultimate balas chesed par excellence. But she understands that in order to be an elevated human being in this world, in order to be somebody who's capable of giving and loving to others, it has to emanate from one's own sense of one's own greatness. I'm important. I'm important. You're important. To the degree to which I know my greatness, the degree to which I'll focus on your greatness. She's so aware of what Hashem does for her. But the degree to which I recognize I'm of value is the degree to which she'll be able to say, Hashem, I deserve to be in a relationship with you because I am someone of value. Of course you want to know. Look who I am. But right now that she was in jeopardy. The jeopardy was maybe she's going to lose sight of her kavod atzmi, her own internal self-respect, her own honor, her own sense of her own value. And therefore the most appropriate thing to say to Naomi was, I did for him. Look at the kindness that I did for him. She has to say that. Now, when we think about that, I think it's somewhat of a remarkable thought. Because we do live in a world where we so value respect for others, and of course that's crucial. We so value respect and for Hashem, and of course that's so important. But I think what we have to focus on and think about as well is who we are. What it means to be created in the image of Hashem and not lose sight of our own dignity, of our own kavod. To respect ourselves and appreciate ourselves for who we are. And not to think that's selfish. That's not selfish at all. Because as we've mentioned, the degree to which we can realize who we are is the degree to which we recognize someone who someone else is. The degree to which we know our greatness, the degree to which we'll be able to say, you're also great. The degree to which we recognize our greatness, the degree to which we say, Hashem, I'm worthy of a relationship with you. I'm going to go for it. I'm not going to hold back on it. I'm worthy of that relationship. This is kavod atzmi. And in many ways, I feel it's not talked about enough. It's not discussed enough. That aspect of ourselves, we have to look at ourselves and say, I have greatness. You know, I think we live in a world today which has really taken its toll on this idea. This idea that the human being is someone of value. I think we're losing it in many respects. I remember I heard once the name of Rabbi, a great Mashgiach in Yerushalayim, and he said something very fascinating that always stayed with me. That he said, in the 20th century, 1900s, no longer there anymore, he said, man walked in the 20th century influenced by three philosophies of the 1800s, the 19th century. And who are they? He said they were Freud, Marx, and Darwin. So if you think about it, well, the philosophy of let's go with Marx, Karl Marx. The idea that the essence of man is his capital production. Interesting. Look at Freud. Freud developed this idea of the subconscious and the dark black forces, the ego, that the id that influenced the human being. Very much our Yetzer Hara, which is really something he was working off of. Some say even from discussions that he had with the Friedrich, the Rabbi. And of course, Darwin, the ultimate expression of the theories of Darwin was that we emanate from the animal. We're just an extension, we're more developed animal. So Mashgiach Rabbi said one time, he said, look, 20th century man walked in and said, who am I? What am I all about? Let's see. Marx says I'm a machine. Freud says I'm one big id. Darwin says I'm an ape. I'm a machine, I'm an id, and an ape. Wow. Where in that description can we find the greatness of what it means to be created in the image of God? Okay. Maybe it's no wonder that the 20th century saw more mass murder. The Holocaust, of course, the ultimate expression of it than any other time in human history. So I think as we go forth in our day, practically, I think we need to do small things in our day to focus on what it means to have kavod atzmi, to have internal greatness. Small things, For example, a small thing might be sitting down before we eat something. I could stand when I eat. I could sit because I possess a degree of dignity. It could be say I'm going to drink a cup of coffee, but a little bit slower. Dignity could mean that I'm speaking to somebody, I'm a little bit more sensitive, the way I listen, the way I respond, not respond so quickly, think about what the person's saying a little bit more. What dignity might be the way we dress. A little bit saying, I want to dress in a way which conveys a little bit more of my elegance of who I am, which is very much Jewish dress, by the way. To dress in a way that conveys the elegance, the refinement, the greatness of the human being, the Jew. Small things in our day that we can do to remind us of really how great we really are. What kavod atzmi is. What it means to have self-dignity, self-respect, and greatness. And I think we could do that. I think everything else will fall into line. Our relationships with people will improve. We'll see greatness in them. Our relationship with Hashem will improve. People will feel worthy of the fact that we too have a right, and Hashem has a desire to relate to someone who's so dignified and exalted as we are. And thank you so much for listening, everybody. And look forward to continuing this conversation, discussion, as we go forward every Tuesday.